You lie in bed and the loop starts. Replaying the conversation from 3 hours ago, rewriting what you should have said, forecasting what they'll think of you tomorrow. And you call this thinking. You tell yourself you're working something out. You're being thorough. You're being responsible. But here's what nobody tells you: that's not thinking. That's self-abandonment dressed up as problem-solving. And it's costing you your peace, your sleep, your presence, and slowly, over years, your sense of who you actually are. Because the more you live inside that loop, the less you live anywhere else. Here's the costly mistake most people make. They believe the voice in their head is them. They believe that the stream of commentary, judgment, prediction, and regret running through their consciousness is their identity. So when the loop starts, they don't question it. They engage with it. They argue with it. They try to win against it using more of the same thinking that created it. And the loop tightens. So let me give you the one idea that changes everything. Overthinking isn't a thinking problem. It's an identification problem. You are not the voice in your head. You are the awareness that hears it. And the moment you see that, the moment you really see it, not as a concept but as a lived experience, the loop loses its grip. Not because you fought it. Because you stopped being the one running it. Most people never make this distinction their entire lives. They walk around completely fused with the narration in their skulls, believing every thought that arises is a fact, every worry is a signal, every replay is productive. They are inside the voice, being pushed around by it, and they don't even know there's an outside. The Stoics knew there was an outside. And they built an entire discipline around living from that place. Think about what happens when the loop grabs you. Something goes wrong during the day. A meeting goes sideways. Someone gives you a look you can't decode. A text sits unread for too long. And within seconds, the voice launches. What did they mean? What should I have done? What are they thinking? What if this happens? What if that happens? And you sit there, physically still, but mentally you're somewhere else entirely. You're in a future that hasn't arrived. You're in a past that's already gone. You're everywhere except here. And here is the only place anything real can actually happen. The Stoics had a word for this kind of mental exile. They would have called it a surrender. You surrendered your faculty of judgment to an untrained, unobserved, undirected mind. Marcus Aurelius, a man who ran an empire, faced betrayal, plague, war, and the daily weight of enormous responsibility, wrote to himself again and again about this exact problem. He didn't write for an audience. He wrote to himself, because he caught himself doing the same thing you do. Drifting into the loop. Leaving the present. Letting the mind run him instead of the other way around. And his solution was never to think harder. It was to return. Return to the present. Return to what's actually in front of you. Return to the seat of judgment that you abandoned the moment the loop took over. Here's the truth nobody wants to say out loud. Overthinking feels productive because it mimics the shape of problem solving. It has the texture of work. You're sitting there, furrow-browed, turning things over. It feels like you're doing something. But you're not doing something. You're avoiding something. The loop is a refuge from uncertainty. When you don't know what someone thinks of you, when you don't know how a situation will resolve, when you can't control the outcome, the mind panics. Not because it wants to solve the problem. Because it can't tolerate the not knowing. So it generates endless loops of thought to fill the gap where certainty should be. It creates the illusion of control through sheer volume of analysis. And you mistake the volume for progress. But here's what's really happening underneath. There's an unresolved emotion. Fear, usually. Sometimes shame. Sometimes grief. Sometimes just the raw ache of not being in control. And instead of sitting with that feeling, instead of letting it be what it is without narrating it, the mind spins. It converts the feeling into a story. It turns fear into a forecast. It turns shame into a replay. It turns uncertainty into a strategy. And now you're not feeling the feeling anymore. You're thinking about it. Which means you're not processing it. Which means it stays. And it feeds the next loop. And the next. And the next. Eckhart Tolle called this the pain body. It's the accumulated, unprocessed emotional pain that lives in you and feeds on more pain. It's not metaphorical. You can feel it. It's that heaviness in your chest when the loop starts. That tightening in your jaw. That tension in your shoulders. The pain body is a living thing inside you, and it has an appetite. And what it eats is your mental energy. What it drinks is your attention. And the more you feed it with looping thoughts, the stronger it gets. The more you replay the conversation, the more it wants to replay it. The more you forecast disaster, the more it needs to forecast more. It's not calming down. It's not resolving. It's feeding. And you are the one holding the spoon. The Stoics saw this too, though they used different language. They understood that the mind, left ungoverned, doesn't seek truth. It seeks confirmation of its own disturbances. An anxious mind looks for evidence of danger. A resentful mind looks for evidence of insult. A shameful mind looks for evidence of inadequacy. The loop isn't searching for answers. It's searching for material to sustain itself. And it will find it every time, because the mind is extraordinarily good at justifying its own emotional state. So the first thing you have to understand, the thing that Singer spent years teaching and that the Stoics practiced 2,000 years earlier, is this. You are not your thoughts. You are not the voice. You are not the loop. You are the awareness in which the loop appears. Think about this right now. There's a voice reading these words in your head right now. You can hear it. You're aware of it. But who's aware of it? That awareness, that silent, spacious presence that notices the voice, that's you. The voice is content. You are context. The voice is weather. You are the sky. And the sky doesn't argue with the weather. It doesn't try to fix the storm. It doesn't replay the last storm and worry about the next one. It just holds it all and remains what it is. Vast. Still. Unbothered. Most people call this a mourning. The Stoics would call it a surrender. You wake up, and before your feet touch the floor, the loop is running. Before you've even had a conversation with another human being, you've had 40 conversations with yourself, all of them imaginary, most of them adversarial. You've rehearsed arguments that haven't happened. You've lost debates with people who aren't in the room. You've decided how someone will react before they've had the chance to react. And you did all of this from a horizontal position, eyes half open, completely fused with a voice that doesn't know the difference between imagination and reality. The first practice, and it's ancient, is simple to describe and hard to do. Listen to the voice in your head as if it were someone else's. Not your voice. A voice. A stranger sitting behind you on a bus, narrating your life out loud. And you don't have to argue with the stranger. You don't have to agree with the stranger. You just listen. You notice. Oh, there it goes again. It's replaying the conversation. It's forecasting the outcome. It's judging me. It's worrying. Interesting. And in that moment of noticing, something extraordinary happens. A gap opens. A space between you and the thought. And in that gap, you're free. Not because the thought stopped. Because you're no longer inside it. You're watching it. And a watched thought has less power than an unnoticed one. Every time. This is what Singer means when he says you are not your thoughts. Thoughts are objects. They appear within awareness. They are not the subject. When you say I am anxious, you've made a category error. You've collapsed the distinction between the experiencer and the experience. You are not anxious. Anxiety is appearing within you. You are the awareness in which anxiety appears. And that awareness was here before the anxiety arrived, and it will be here after the anxiety leaves. The anxiety is a guest. You are the house. And the house doesn't become the guest just because the guest is loud. But here's where a lot of people stop, and here's where the Stoics would say they've stopped too soon. Because just watching the thought, just creating the gap, that's necessary but it's not sufficient. Tolle and Singer point you toward observation. The Stoics point you toward something harder. Governance. You don't just watch the thought. You judge it. You don't just notice the loop. You withdraw your consent from it. And then you redirect. Epictetus was very clear about this. He taught that you have a faculty that he called prohairesis, your capacity for voluntary assent and choice. Thoughts arise in your mind constantly. Impressions, he called them. Someone says something, and the impression arrives, they insulted me. Someone doesn't respond, and the impression arrives, they don't care about me. Something goes wrong, and the impression arrives, this is a disaster. Now here's the critical point. The impression is not the problem. The impression is automatic. What happens next is not automatic. You have a choice. You can give your assent to the impression, or you can withhold it. You can say yes, this is a disaster, and now the loop begins. Or you can say, this is an impression. It's strong. It feels real. But I have not yet examined it. I will not assent to it until I've examined it. And in that pause, in that refusal to automatically agree with your own mind, you've done something that most people never do in their entire lives. You've exercised sovereignty over your own consciousness. This is the difference between passive observation and Stoic governance. The modern mindfulness movement often says just notice the thought and let it pass. And that's good as far as it goes. But the Stoics go further. They say notice the thought, examine it, and then decide. Is this thought true? Is it useful? Is it within my control? Does it serve me? And if not, withdraw your assent. Don't just let it drift by like a cloud. Refuse it. Not with anger, not with force, but with the calm authority of someone who has the right to decide what enters their mind and what doesn't. Because you do have that right. It's the most fundamental right you possess. And you've been giving it away to every passing thought that knocks on the door. Most people can't tell the difference between thinking and overthinking because they've never experienced the alternative. They've never had a moment where the mind goes quiet and they're still fully present, still fully functional, still fully alive. They think quiet means empty. They think silence means numbness. They think the absence of the loop is the absence of themselves. But it's the opposite. The loop is the absence of yourself. The loop is you being replaced by a mechanical process that mimics consciousness. The silence is you returning. So let's talk about what actually breaks the loop. Not theoretically. Practically. What do you do at 2 in the morning when the loop is running and you can't sleep and the voice won't stop? First, you stop trying to solve the problem the loop is presenting. Because the loop isn't presenting a real problem. It's presenting a disguised emotional state. The loop says, what if they're mad at me? But the real content is, I'm afraid of being rejected. The loop says, I should have said something different. But the real content is, I feel powerless and I'm trying to regain control through imagination. The loop says, I need to figure this out. But the real content is, I can't tolerate uncertainty. You can't solve a disguised problem. You can only unmask it. So you ask yourself a different question. Not what should I do about this? But what am I actually feeling right now? And then you sit with the answer. Not narrate it. Not analyze it. Sit with it. Feel it in your body. Where is it? Is it in your chest? Your stomach? Your throat? What does it feel like? Heavy? Sharp? Dull? Hot? Cold? And you stay with the sensation. Not the story about the sensation. The sensation itself. And you breathe. And you wait. And what you'll find, if you do this honestly, is that the feeling, when you stop feeding it with thought, begins to shift. It softens. It moves. It passes. Not always quickly. Not always easily. But it passes. Because feelings are designed to pass. It's the thoughts about the feelings that keep them locked in place. Second, you externalize. This is one of the most powerful tools for breaking the loop, and almost nobody uses it correctly. Writing to yourself works when thinking to yourself doesn't. And here's why. When you think, your mind can be vague. It can loop in circles without ever landing on a conclusion. It can contradict itself and not notice. It can spiral into abstraction and never come back. But when you write, you force precision. You have to put the thought into words. You have to make it concrete. You have to give it a beginning, a middle, and an end. And the moment you do that, you've done something the loop can't do on its own. You've created structure. You've taken the amorphous cloud of worry and given it edges. And once it has edges, you can see it. And once you can see it, you can evaluate it. Is this true? Is this likely? Is this within my control? What would I tell a friend who came to me with this? You write it down, and suddenly the monster that was enormous in the dark of your mind becomes something specific on the page. Something finite. Something you can work with. Marcus Aurelius did this. He wrote to himself every morning. Not for publication. Not for posterity. He wrote because he knew that his mind would loop without governance. He wrote because he knew that the voice in his head needed to be met with the voice of his principles. He wrote because externalizing his thoughts was the only way to hold them accountable. When you think, the thought can hide. When you write, the thought is exposed. And an exposed thought is almost always less frightening than a hidden one. So write it down. Whatever the loop is telling you, write it down. Not on a screen. On paper. With a pen. The physical act of writing slows the mind to the speed of the hand, and in that slowing, the loop breaks. You can't loop and write at the same time. Not really. Writing demands sequential logic. The loop is circular. They're incompatible. And writing wins, because writing is a physical act that anchors you in the present moment, in your body, at your desk, with your hand moving across the page. The loop can't survive that kind of grounding. Third, you apply the Stoic filter. Epictetus gave us the most practical question in the history of practical questions. Is this within my control? If yes, act. If no, let it go. That's it. That's the entire filter. And it works on every loop. Every single one. What they think of you. Not in your control. Let it go. What you should have said. Past. Not in your control. Let it go. What will happen tomorrow? Future. Not in your control. Let it go. What you can do right now, in this moment, with what you have, where you are. In your control. Act. Now, letting go doesn't mean you don't care. It means you understand the architecture of reality. There are things that are up to you, and there are things that are not. And spending your mental energy on the things that are not is not just pointless. It's destructive. It's self-harm. Every time you loop over something outside your control, you're taking energy that could be used on something within your control and pouring it down a drain. And then you wonder why you feel exhausted. You wonder why you feel depleted. You wonder why you still don't feel whole, you still don't feel like yourself. It's because you've been giving yourself away to things that were never yours to carry. The loop is seductive because it feels like caring. You tell yourself that worrying about someone means you love them. That replaying your mistakes means you're growing. That forecasting problems means you're prepared. But you're not preparing. You're paralyzing. You're not growing. You're grinding. You're not loving. You're controlling. And the people you're worrying about would almost certainly rather have you present and calm than absent and anxious. Your worry doesn't help them. Your worry helps the loop. The loop doesn't love anyone. The loop just loops. Here's what nobody tells you about the loop. It has a life cycle. It starts with a trigger, something external that creates an impression. Then it moves into narration, the voice begins telling the story. Then it moves into identification, you merge with the story and forget you're the one hearing it. Then it moves into emotional intensification, the feeling grows because you're feeding it with thought. Then it moves into behavioral paralysis, you can't act because you're too busy thinking about acting. And then it either burns itself out from exhaustion, or something external breaks it, a phone call, a distraction, sleep. And you call that resolution. But it's not resolution. It's interruption. And because the loop was never actually resolved, it will return. Tonight. Tomorrow. Next week. The same loop. The same thoughts. The same exhaustion. Because you never addressed the root. The root is identification. The root is believing you are the voice. The root is giving your assent to every impression without examination. The root is refusing to sit with uncertainty and reaching for the loop instead. And the cure is not more thinking. The cure is less identification with the thinker. The cure is remembering that you are the awareness behind the voice, not the voice itself. The cure is the Stoic discipline of withdrawing assent from thoughts that don't serve you and redirecting your energy toward action that does. The cure is writing instead of looping. Feeling instead of narrating. Acting instead of rehearsing. Being present instead of being everywhere else. And here's the thing that takes this from philosophy to practice. You have to catch the loop early. The longer it runs, the harder it is to break. Because the longer you're in it, the more identified you become. After 30 seconds, you can still notice you're looping. After 30 minutes, you've become the loop. The voice has consumed you. And now you're not watching the storm. You are the storm. So the practice is to catch it at 30 seconds. At the first sign. When you feel that little tightening, that little pull, that little sensation of the mind reaching for something it can't have. That's the moment. Not later. Not after you've thought about it some more. Right then. You notice. You pause. You ask, is this within my control? And if it's not, you let it go. Not violently. Not with force. With the quiet authority of someone who has done this before and knows that the thought, unfed, will die on its own. Carl Jung understood something about this that adds another layer. He said that what you resist persists. And this is true of the loop. If you fight the loop grows. If you try to force yourself to stop thinking, you think more about stopping thinking. The loop feeds on opposition. So the Stoic approach is not opposition. It's observation plus governance. You don't fight the thought. You notice it. You examine it. You withdraw your assent. And you redirect. You don't say stop thinking about this. You say I see this thought. I don't accept it. And now I'm going to do this instead. The redirect is everything. Because the mind can't hold two intentions at once. If you redirect toward action, toward the present, toward what's in front of you, the loop doesn't have space to run. It needs your full attention to sustain itself. Redirect your attention and it starves. This is why the Stoics emphasized action so heavily. Not because action is always the answer. But because action is the antidote to the loop. The loop lives in the abstract. Action lives in the concrete. The loop lives in the future and the past. Action lives in the present. The loop lives in imagination. Action lives in reality. When you act, you force the mind to deal with what's actually happening instead of what might happen. And most of the time, what's actually happening is manageable. It's the what-ifs that aren't. Think about the last time you were deep in a loop and something broke it. Maybe someone called you. Maybe you had to go somewhere. Maybe a child needed your attention. And suddenly the loop stopped. Not because you solved the problem. Because reality interrupted the fiction. And when you came back to the loop later, it was weaker. Because you'd experienced the truth that the loop doesn't want you to know. The problem is never as big as the loop makes it. The situation is never as dire as the forecast. The conversation is never as catastrophic as the replay. The loop exaggerates. That's its nature. It takes a grain of concern and builds a cathedral of catastrophe. And you live in the cathedral and wonder why you can't breathe. So the practice, the daily, practical, unglamorous Stoic practice, is this. You wake up. Before the loop starts, before the phone, before the narration begins, you take one breath. You feel the breath. You notice the body. You remember that you are awareness, not the voice. You set your intention for the day, not as a wish but as a discipline. I will not give my assent to impressions I have not examined. I will not loop over what I cannot control. I will act on what I can. I will be here. And then you get up. And when the loop starts, and it will start, because it always starts, you catch it. You notice. You pause. You ask the question. You withdraw assent. You redirect. You act. And you do it again. And again. And again. Not perfectly. Not without failure. But consistently. Because this is what discipline looks like. Not a dramatic gesture. Not a one-time transformation. A daily, hourly, sometimes minute-by-minute choice to govern your own mind instead of being governed by it. And over time, something shifts. The gaps between the thoughts grow longer. The loop starts later and breaks sooner. The identification weakens. You start to hear the voice as a voice, not as yourself. You start to feel the anxiety as a sensation, not as a truth. You start to notice the pull before it becomes a spiral. And in those gaps, in those moments of clarity, you feel something you haven't felt in a long time. Wholeness. Not because the problems are gone. Not because the uncertainty is resolved. But because you've stopped abandoning yourself to a mechanical process that was never you to begin with. You've come home. To the awareness. To the presence. To the seat of judgment that was always yours and that you simply forgot you were sitting in. Overthinking isn't a thinking problem. It's an identification problem. And the cure isn't more thought. It's less identification with the thinker. It's the Stoic discipline of watching the voice, examining the impression, withdrawing assent, and acting on what's real. It's writing instead of looping. Feeling instead of narrating. Being present instead of being everywhere else. It's remembering, moment by moment, that you are the sky, not the weather. The awareness, not the thought. The one who chooses, not the one who loops. The loop will come back tonight. It always does. But now you know what it is. And more importantly, you know what you are. You are not the voice in your head. You never were. You are the silence behind it. The awareness that hears it. The authority that decides what to do with it. And that authority is yours. It has always been yours. All you had to do was stop listening to the voice long enough to remember. Stay disciplined.